Hello Montmorency Primary School. Welcome to the Farms to School program run through the Port Phillip and Western Port Catchment Management Authority. Today we're going to take you on a tour of Sugarloaf produce. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, the traditional owners on the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Farms to School is a program which will introduce students in Greater Melbourne to local farmers and agricultural industry workers. Our guests will share information about how they contribute to supplying food to all of you. We want you, the students, to gain an insight into how everyday agricultural products get from the paddock to your plate. We want to help you understand and appreciate Australian agriculture, explore how farmers keep soils, waterways and produce healthy, and everything that happens along the way until you're able to buy the food and eat it. After all of this, you may even want to be part of this amazing industry in the future. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Farmer Izzy from Sugarloaf Produce. Farmer Izzy is going to take you on a tour of her farm.
Thanks for the intro, Stacey. Our farm is at the base of Mount Sugarloaf and the Kinglake Ranges. The property is about 75 acres in size, but almost 2/3 of it is bush. If you've ever been to Kinglake National Park before, you'll know where we are. Now I'm going to take you for a tour of our farm and answer some of your questions. So one of the most important things we grow on the farm are Swiss brown mushrooms, and it's where we get most of our income. This morning I think we're going to find Josh in the mushy sheds, picking mushies, before he clears out one of the sheds and gets it ready for planting new mushies. Let's go and have a look. Now mushrooms don't grow in the usual way, not the way that other vegetables grow. We have to grow mushrooms in shipping containers that have got temperature controlled in them. Each one of the sheds has got an air conditioning unit set to between 17 and 24 degrees, which is optimal mushroom growing conditions. We buy our mushroom compost in, and it's already pre-inoculated with mycelium, which is how mushrooms start growing. When we get here, we case the mushrooms, which means we prepare beds, we put casing on top, which is made out of peat moss, and then we water them, we set the temperature, and then we wait for them to grow. Hey Josh! We've come to have a look at you growing, or not growing, but picking mushies.
Yep.
How do you know when these mushrooms are ready?
Well, basically they're button mushrooms. So you're sort of looking at something like that.
Yep.
Your typical field mushroom tends to be a bit bigger and it opens up. These also open up, but we pick them just before that. Yeah, about that size, that colour. If you can maybe.
I'll hold it up.
It's got a slightly brown colouring on top. When they're a bit younger, they're a bit more pinkish, so we wait till they're a bit more brown and about that size.
So how long after casing does it take for the first flush to come through?
A couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many flushes do we get?
About 3. If you're really good with sort of controlling disease and pests, you can maybe push to 4, but about 3.
Because we're growing organically too, we can't really control the fungus that might come in later on through the growing process. We have to just call it at about four flushes and throw it out and start again.
Yeah.
So what else is involved with growing the mushies?
Well, it's a pretty simple process. We sort of get these cases in from a manufacturer, and they're basically a straw and mycelium mixture. And then what we do is we sort of make up a mixture, a peat mixture, which is this stuff here. This it's like a soil-like substance. You sort of make up a mixture of dark peat and light peat. And we add a bit of lime because they really sort of like the calcium. And then we spread that on top of the cases that we get in and water them in. Then we shock the mushrooms by dropping the temperature to about 14 degrees, I think it is. and then we do that overnight, and then we raise back up to about 22 degrees, and then away we go. Yeah.
Nice.
And the most important thing, like the reason we use the peat mixture is because it holds moisture really well. And mushrooms like a really moist growing environment. So yeah, this is a bit more efficient than soil, for example, at holding water. Probably doesn't have more nutrients than soil, but it's just really good at holding water.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Josh.
no
We
worries.
might come back later when you do the shed clear out
Yep.
and explain how that process works.
Sure, cool.
Cool. Thanks. See ya. So free-range egg production is a big part of our farm as well. But we do things a little bit differently here. Instead of the chickens being in a stationary, permanent chook house, we have a mobile chook tractor. Let me show you what I mean. Basically, the chook tractor is one big trailer. And you can see, we can move it around with the tractor or Warren's four-wheel drive. It means we can move the chooks all around the farm and fertilise the pasture in the process. What we need to be careful of is turning off the electric fence before we go in. So I'll do that now. Now I've got 5 pages of questions from all of you guys. I can see here Axel from 3-4B asks, how many chickens do we have? Well, we have about 100 chickens here, but do you think they all lay an egg a day? No. So we'd be lucky to get maybe 60 to 70 eggs every day. So some of the chicks are laying every 2 days or so. Another question for 3-4B from Sebastian is, how sneaky are foxes? Well, very sneaky. And you'll see with the electric fencing that we use around here, it's the best and easiest way to keep the foxes out. Some farmers run dogs with their chickens called maremas, or some of them even have alpacas, and they help protect the chickens too. But we found the electric fencing is more than enough, sufficient enough to keep the foxes out. And don't be alarmed, it doesn't hurt them. It's just a small little shock when they touch it, and over time they learn not to go to the fence or try and get out. 3-4D. Did you have any questions about chickens? This is a good question from Angelique. What products do we have on our farm and where do we sell them? So we're a mixed farming business, which means we do more than one thing. We grow vegetables, we grow fruit, we grow mushrooms, we have animals, chickens, sheep and cows, and with the chickens we have eggs. So that's all the different things we do here. And most of our produce we sell at the farmers market, and specifically Eltham Farmers Market. And when you talk about food supply chains, which you may or may not be familiar with, we have a very short food supply chain. So instead of somebody buying our produce and taking it to a wholesaler and then selling that on to a fruit and vegetable shop, we sell directly to the consumer, which is you. So here are all the nest boxes, and this is where the chickens will lay their eggs, hopefully. Each little nest box has a hole at the bottom. So when the chicken pops in, a little bit like this one here, gets all comfy, lays an egg, and it falls through into this chute. Oh, and you can see in here, some of the chickens have already laid eggs. So it makes collecting the eggs really easy. Excuse me, lady. A lot of you have sent in heaps of questions about the animals on the farm, and the sheep, well, they're a pretty big part of the farm. We have about 35 sheep with a lot of new lambs having just been born at the start of spring. We don't sell our lamb meat at the market. They're mainly for personal consumption and for friends and family. You might notice as we walk around the farm that there are a lot of dead trees and a lot of structures that look like they've been burnt, and that's because they have. In 2009, a very big bushfire came through this area and burnt a lot of houses to the ground, including the one here at my partner's farm. Unfortunately, my partner Warren and his dad and the rest of the family lost everything they had. All of the fences, all of the fruit trees, all of the buildings, and some of the animals even perished too. It's been a very long road to recovery, but we're now starting a new farm and growing different things. So Sugarloaf Produce is not a conventional farm. We're an organic farm. We're not certified, but we practice biological or regenerative farming practices, which is much more sustainable than conventional farming. One of the things we've done on the farm is established a whole bunch of new paddock trees in an old gully line. You can see behind me a whole bunch of guards and stakes protecting our new eucalyptus trees. Planting new trees, doing weed control, and practicing regenerative farming techniques are key to being sustainable and having a sustainable farm. Which leads me to a question that we got. Let me find it. From Class 5 6B from Miri, who asked, how did you get into farming and are you sustainable? Well, I think we've answered the last part of her question, but how did I get into farming? Well, this farm was actually my partner Warren's family farm. So we started farming the property in about 2015 when his dad retired. And before we farmed the property, it was an old fruit orchard. And you can see behind me the old orchard rows that used to have fruit trees on them, which we now graze. So one of the weeds that we have to control on the farm are thistles. This is a slender thistle, and you can see it's very spiky, and if we let it grow, it could possibly take over the whole pasture, and I don't think that that's very tasty for the sheep and cows. Plus, the thorns can get stuck in the sheep's wool and make the wool pretty much unusable. Hey Josh.
Basically, we're doing a shed clean now. After about 3 flushes of the mushrooms, there tends to be a lot of disease, and you don't get as good a quality of mushroom coming through. So it's time to clean the shed. And if you come over here, you can sort of see what happens. Instead of mushrooms, you'll be getting stuff like that. It looks like a little marshmallow.
And the mushrooms are starting to become a bit odd in shape as well.
Yeah, you'll still get mushrooms. You can see a few alright little mushrooms coming through, but you get all this yucky stuff as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't look very appetizing.
Yep.
So what's going to happen to all this compost?
Straight on the veggie beds.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's got heaps of nutrients in it, so it's really good to feed veggies.
Yeah, we'll talk more about compost later on when we get to the market garden. Another thing that makes our farm really sustainable is that a lot of the structures around the property are made from timber that's been felled from our property. So you can see in front of me is a portable sawmill, and Warren's been making slabs to build our sheep yards. I'll show you our sheep yards now. Finally, we make it to the market garden. So growing vegetables and fruit is another big part of the farm. We've just finished, you can see behind me, planting our potatoes out for this year. Now, they haven't shot through the mulch yet, but if we dig around, I can show you what a seed potato looks like. Aha! Here we are. So, a seed potato is basically a potato, but once they start shooting, that's when it's time to plant them. And this one potato will become many potatoes and much bigger, perfect for chips and mashed potato. We put the mulch on top of the potatoes to keep the moisture in so they don't dry out. Now, usually when the children are here on a tour, I'll ask them to have a guess at what this crop is. And you guys can have a guess at home, because it's very hard to know when it's at this stage of its life cycle. What do you think it is? Which part do you think is edible? Is it the top or is it the bottom? I'll tell you, it's garlic, and it's not quite ready yet. Garlic won't be harvested until November on our farm, and by then the bottom of the plant will have grown out and be ready for harvesting. We'll chop the top off, hang them up to dry, and they look more like the garlic that you get from the shop. Our orchard has hundreds of different types of fruit trees in it, and in between every second or third row we've planted vegetables. It's a good utilisation of space and makes it much more productive. This is a freshly planted bed. We've got coriander, lettuce, onions, and beetroot further down. You might be able to see on the top is a layer of compost. Now, compost is key to growing our vegetables here on the farm. We make the compost on site, and it's a mixture of green waste, manure, straw, and other organic materials that break down over time and create a really good growing medium for the plants. I mentioned earlier that the farm is organic, so that means we don't use any chemical pesticides which control pests, or weedicides or herbicides that control pest plants. So we've got to be smart about the way we do things, and keeping the grass down is a big part of that. You can see the irrigation, which is how the water gets to the plants, is elevated. So this means that we can get here and brush cut underneath the irrigation lines without damaging them. Traditional or conventional farms would probably spray this grass, but instead we use mechanical control to keep it down. That way it doesn't compete with the plant roots and affect the amount of fruit that we get. I've got a question from Mia from class 5/6B. She says, is it hard keeping all the veggies healthy? Well, that's a really good question. And I guess the key to growing healthy, delicious vegetables is making sure you grow the vegetables at the right time of the year. If you've ever grown tomatoes in winter, you'll realize that trying to get them to grow fruit is really difficult. So making sure you plant your vegetables at the right time that suits their growing requirements. You also need sun, water, and probably a bit of talking to as well. Well, thanks for coming on a tour of the farm with me. Next time I hope you can come here in person. See ya!